Hi, Justina. Thanks so much for hopping on with me. I'm super excited to talk more about what you do and everything you've been through. Can we start off by just telling everyone just a little bit about yourself and what you do now?
Sure. Thanks so much for having me. I'm excited to be here too. So my name is Justina Thompson, and I do a lot of different things, but what I focus on, what my biggest passion is teaching the fertility awareness method, which is a form of natural birth control that's as effective as the pill, which is awesome. And it can also be used to actually try to help someone get pregnant if they're ready. And so I teach that to women. And along with that comes one-on-one coaching as to how to nourish hormones and nourish our fertility, and why it is important that we are ovulating and that we are in tune with what our bodies are doing and telling us. So that's my passion.
Yeah.
And I'm also, currently studying herbs and doing a program with using herbs for female issues and female health. And so that's something that'll be fun to incorporate in the future.
Yeah, that's awesome. It goes hand in hand, I feel like, with the herbs and for the female health. So that's awesome. How did you start doing this? Because I'm sure you weren't 13 years old and when you had your period, you did the fertility awareness method, but
That's true. I had no idea it existed, honestly, until I was 20 years old, I believe. So I got into this because as a teenager, I was put on Accutane for really bad acne. And if anyone is familiar with Accutane, it's a type of medicine that's so strong that the doctor requires you to be on 2 types of birth control. So abstinence counted as one, but you also had to be on like the pill or a form of birth control. And so as like a young and fairly somewhat healthy, like 15-year-old, I was put on the patch.
Wow.
And I wasn't sexually active, so I was abstinent, and then they had me on a patch just so that I could get rid of acne that I was experiencing. Turns out my acne was probably from way different things that I could have supported, but at the time I had no idea how to look at what's causing the symptom instead of just the symptom. And the patch actually eventually caused me to realize that my mood had flattened and my personality had flattened. So after I had been on it for about 6 months, I was like, I don't even feel like I've cried about anything in like a year or something. Like, why am I not emotional anymore?
Yeah.
Why am I not feeling creative anymore? So that was my first experience with birth control. And then later on in college, when I entered a sexual relationship, I got on a different form of birth control, which was an oral contraceptive pill. And that within, 2 weeks sent me through severe mood swings to the point where, it was a sweet, young girl, just like super nice and quiet, but to the point of getting in such heated fights with my boyfriend that one night I punched a cement wall with my bare fist and hurt my hand, and then was like, just out of it. And really the only thing that had changed in that cycle was that I got on this birth control pill. So I got off of that. And then by the time I was in a relationship with my now husband, we were getting serious and we were talking about marriage and birth control. And he said, well, it sounds like you had really bad experiences with the patch and the pill. He said, there's got to be another option. And I told him, he was raised in a home where they use natural health. And I told him, no, there's nothing natural. Like, the birth control pill might suck, but it's the only thing that works. Yeah. So that's why we use it, and I like kind of talk down to him, like, what do you know? You're not a woman. And he was like, yeah, I hear you. And at the same time, like, there's gotta be something else. I have no idea what's out there, but that doesn't like lower your quality of life. So I did a lot of research, and I came across a couple of books. One you might have heard of, Taking Charge of Your Fertility by Toni Weschler. And then another one, Garden of Your Fertility by Katie Singer. And so I read both of those, didn't believe that fertility charting could be a form of birth control. So I actually started charting to prove the books wrong because I'm very stubborn. And after 1 month of charting, I was like, whoa, like my body's actually telling me something every single day about my fertility. And I was like, this kind of is amazing. Why didn't I know about this until age of 20? And then after 3 months of charting, I was like, okay, this is it. Like my body's telling me day after day after day for 3 months straight, whether I can get pregnant at the end of every day or not. So yeah, it's a really cool thing. That's how I got into it. I knew I wanted to bring this information correctly and accurately to other people around the world, instead of just do like book studies. So I found a program in the United States, the only one currently that's secular, so that's not part of the Catholic Church, and that's in Oregon. And I did a 2-year certification internship for that.
Wow. Oh my gosh. Yeah, that's crazy. And I mean, I've been through, I think, 3 different birth controls trying to control the ovarian cysts I had. And that's the thing. The doctors didn't know what was causing them, and they used that to treat.
Right.
So, yeah, it's frustrating. And I never knew. And meeting people and hearing about that, it's like you guys are the first that I've heard about this method even existing, right? And
right.
It can totally change for women who have gone through so many hormone stuff. Because going through it, you said you learned about a little bit more about your hormones and cycles and stuff. Did you like,
yeah, absolutely. That's a good piece for me to talk about for a second. So once I started charting my cycles, I was able to see, hey, am I ovulating? Like, am I a fertile and ovulatory healthy person, or are there red flags about my cycle? So I found some minor red flags with my period, and which I later learned as I got certified and was like really drenched in the studying of cycles and hormones, that there was some issues with my luteal phase and my progesterone. And so just some simple supplementation in my specific situation was what I needed to balance out that part of my cycle. And then another thing that I grew up with was I didn't grow up with, I should say. After I'd been a menstruating teenager for about 3 years, something just switched and I started having really severe PMS cramps and a headache, like a migraine every time. And I just thought that was normal. So we absorbed the belief in our society that PMS is what women have, period. Like that's how it goes. And then when I became a student of hormones and fertility cycles, I learned that actually our ancestors and today people in other tribes around the world who are less impacted by environmental toxins actually don't have PMS symptoms at all. And the most that they might experience is some bloating, some natural just expansion of the stomach area. And so I have been able to reverse the PMS symptoms that I've just suffered with for so many years because I thought you had to. I thought that's what being a woman was.
Yeah. So what was some of the things that you did then to help?
So one of my favorite supplementations for myself and just in general, we like to call it the happy pill, is actually just magnesium. Magnesium as a supplementation, taking it a cup like twice a day, about a week before the onset of your next period is coming, helps so much with the hormonal transition that we go through leading up to our new cycle. And just makes the transition to losing all of our hormones to bottom out much smoother. So the emotional part can be much smoother. It is a very natural time for us to want to be more introverted as females and be a little bit less active or feel a little bit less like a superhero and want to do 10 things at once. So that's something that I go over much more in depth when I teach fertility charting to women in a full workshop. But we look at the patterns of female hormones and what makes sense based on what each hormone does and when it's highest and when it's lowest. And so magnesium also, in conjunction with calcium, support the body to have less inflammation and less cramping. So what you can get from popping an ibuprofen every day of your period, you can experience from preventively taking magnesium or calcium, depending on the individual, leading up to each period.
Yeah. I feel like knowing that and how your hormones affect you on a daily basis, because men, I shouldn't stereotype, but men are like typically pretty standard, they're regular, they're, but women, we are like up and down and fluctuating, like not just bloating, but feeling different certain ways. And knowing that would be so empowering in terms of understanding why you're like, I don't feel like working out today, or I feel like staying at home tonight, or.
Right, absolutely. It really helps open up a person to listening to the intuition of what their body is saying, because it's backed up by, oh, well, that makes sense. This is the part of my cycle where my progesterone and estrogens are the lowest. And those are my hormones responsible for energy and libido and feeling steadfast and sure and confident. So there's actually this really incredible book. I'll just mention it real quick because it changed my life. And it's called Her Blood is Gold by Laura Owen. And that is an amazing book to read for anyone who's wanting to tune into their body and mainly their menstrual cycle, not just their overall 30 days, but even just the days of menstruating. To look at it in a way where we appreciate it and the amazing benefits that come from it, instead of what I learned to do through my society, which was to ignore it, shove a tampon up my vagina, never look at the blood, pop an ibuprofen, not feel any of the bloating or anything that comes with that, and treat those days of menstruation like I would any other day of the month, where I'm going to run around and do 10 things at once and throw a bunch of parties for people and be this amazing, starlight in other people's lives. When actually that can be a really natural time to slow down and give the body rest and rejuvenation.
Yeah. And knowing that then, because a lot of people often wonder, like, what's wrong with me? Why do I feel a certain way? And then knowing that, it answers certain questions that you might have.
Yeah.
And I know I've seen before on Instagram, you've talked about adrenal and kind of how that's affected your journey.
So another thing that the chart showed me is that I have a thyroid imbalance. Not that they showed me, but they showed me information that suggests I might need to go get that tested. And so the thyroid implications we thought at first were underactive thyroid. Overactive thyroid, so hypothyroidism. And so thinking, okay, that's fine, no big deal. Well, eventually it took 3 more years and my health deteriorating more and more over that time to find out that it wasn't just overactive thyroid. There was actually an autoimmune issue called Hashimoto's disease, when that's where the body kind of goes through symptoms of hypo and hyper back and forth. And so when I did have my blood work done, it was actually indicative of Hashimoto's on a certain spectrum. And that is an autoimmune issue, which kind of blew my mind because I was born with a different autoimmune issue called IgA deficiency. And so I got that from my mother. And so the path that my mother went on with her IgA deficiency was my path wasn't that unsimilar from hers. As late teenagers, early college age, we found ourselves sick with an infection every couple of weeks to the point where we were just on antibiotics over and over and over again. And eventually antibiotics, when overdiagnosed, stopped working. So it would get to the point of like, okay, what are we going to do? Well, 30 years ago when my mom was experiencing that, the doctors said, here's this new therapy, and it's having immunoglobulin transfusions every month to increase her IgA, IgG, IgE cells enough so that she could stay alive every month. So what was happening with her body was all of her immuno levels were so low that if she got a common cold, it would turn into a bacterial infection that then the body wasn't able to fight off without having the right amounts of cells to do that. So since the age of about 20, she's been having an immunoglobulin transfusion every month to this day.
Wow.
And what happens with that process, anyone who's listening who's had a transfusion before or regularly, when you're putting things from other people's bodies slowly dripping into your body, that can cause a lot of side effects. So my mom growing up would have a major migraine leading up to the transfusion, and maybe like an infection because she was running low again on those things. And then after the transfusion, she would have a migraine that kept her in bed for 7 days. So basically out of one standard month, she maybe had 14 days to spend as a somewhat normal functioning woman and mother. Wow. And wife. So I saw that. We, as kids, we grew up taking care of her a lot. We'd take, the ice packs into the bedroom for her, refill them, bring her water, bring her food. And we couldn't really plan, family trips. I grew up not exploring the outdoors. You couldn't, when you have a chronic illness, as you understand yourself, you can't plan on things. You can't predict when you're going to feel crummy. And you also are spending a lot of money on medical bills. And so you don't have travel money. And so that was a really interesting way to grow up. And when I became old enough to realize and be told, hey, you're on the path of your mother. You did inherit this from her. We knew you inherited this from her. We were waiting to see if you were going to be asymptomatic or not. And, saying, hey, we're going to have to look at seeing if you need monthly transfusions. At that time, my now husband walked into my life. And like I mentioned before, he was raised in natural health, something I'd never heard of. All I knew is you go straight to your doctor when you're sick and they give you antibiotics. That's all I knew. And he walked into my college house, and I was holding a hot dog in one hand and one of those gas station Slurpee cups full of red Kool-Aid in the other hand. And I hadn't been able to go to school, my classes in a week. And I had to call out of my waitress job for a couple weekends in a row. I was on my second round of antibiotics, in that 1 month, and they still weren't working. He just walked through the front door, and he knew this was going on. And he was like, "You're sick, right?" And I said, "Yeah." And he was like, "Well, why are you drinking Kool-Aid and eating a hot dog when you're sick?"
Yeah.
And I was like, well, he's like, "Your body needs water." And I was like, "Kool-Aid is water."
Yeah.
He's like, "Your body needs water in the absence of sugar." And I was like, "What are you talking about?" So we literally started me at water, purified water. And then we tried to take out some sugar. He actually brought over to the house homeopathy because I never would have taken homeopathy at that point in my life, having no idea what it was. But my doctor's office was closed for the weekend, and I was suffering, and I had a fever, and I needed something. And so he's like, this can only help. And so by Monday, I was better, and I got better without antibiotics. I couldn't believe it. So literally from that day, we worked on, with much kicking and screaming on my part, nutrition. And we worked on environmental toxins. I was covering myself in, lotions and hair gels and hairsprays filled with toxins. My house had Febreze and air fresheners left and right. So we worked on that. So what we did was a type of natural health practice. We neutralized toxins and we built up my antibodies. And we did that through nutrition and lifestyle. And then when I would catch something, if I caught a cold or something, normally I would get an antibiotic. When you are IgA deficient, you don't wait to see if it goes away after 7 days. You immediately go get an antibiotic because you can't mess around with it. Instead, we would use homeopathy and home remedies like cold wet socks for fever. Have you ever done cold wet socks? It's an old wives' home remedy. And we would do some, supplementation, some herbs, things like that. And now I get to the point where if I catch a cold or an infection, it's maybe once a year.
Wow. Did you ever think that your nutrition and like your environment could have that effect on what you were doing? And
I had no idea. And like I said, it was a very long process for me to get my T's crossed and my I's dotted and be willing to make those changes.
yeah,
Because I had not learned anything about nutrition. I mean, I learned a little bit of like the popular 80s nutrition, which was fat is bad for you and eat margarine instead of butter, because my mom was a dietitian for the state. And so we learned the food pyramid, which now there's a lot of misinformation about that time period of nutrition and health that's being brought to the surface. And so part of what took me so long to turn my health around was because I didn't believe that it could affect you that much.
yeah.
And so, we've done a lot of stuff to bring education to others in my family who suffer from the same deficiency. And those who have decided to focus on nutrition and building up antibodies through the foods they eat and by eliminating toxins are getting sick less and less and less often. And so they're getting farther away from the path that my mom was put on.
Yeah. And that's life-changing when you can live your life quote unquote normally instead of having to worry about getting sick or doctors and all that stuff. It's serious.
Absolutely. It's very life-changing. So definitely something that I'm forever grateful for, that the universe put Marshall in my life so that I could learn these things. But I definitely have been the most stubborn. Now I'm really much more open and much more disciplined about things. But when he first met me, I'll tell you what, I was the hardest person, I think, to follow his information. And I also found myself not believing it because it was coming from one source.
Yeah.
So if you or any of the listeners can relate, he might say something and I would go Google it and make sure other people are saying it too. And this was someone that I was in love with, and I was still doing that.
Sure. Yeah. So much for building trust in a relationship.
Right. Wait, what does Google say?
Yeah. How long ago was that when you first met him and first started changing everything?
9 years ago this August. So, and again, in the very first 3 years of that process, I was still kicking and screaming and not completely letting go of, everything that had sugar in it, and not completely letting go of certain, mascara or something. Like I was still holding on to certain things that were comforts for me. And so I was still then catching these colds, which would turn into infection, strep throat or sinus infection or pneumonia. And I would get those much more frequently, like I had been used to. It was farther apart. So it took probably about 4 years before I said, okay, I'm all in.
Yeah.
Let's do everything. Tell me every single thing that I can change and I will change it, to be to the point where I may not get sick at all in the span of 12 months.
Yeah. Wow. What was your biggest struggle going through that?
I would have to say food.
Food, yeah. It's sometimes, and just speaking personally, it's that I'm very sensitive to dairy and gluten, and even just like peanuts, like could be healthy, but my body doesn't process it. In terms of it's not fair. I say in my mind, but it's not fair. Everyone else can eat these things, and I can't, quote unquote, right? And it's all mindset, but
it is. Yeah, I felt the same way. I would be so sad. I'd be mourning the dairy. I eventually, probably 4 years ago, learned, okay, dairy, okay, gluten, and spicy foods. So like a lot of jalapenos, alcohol, vodka, wine, which were my favorites in college. Yeah. These all trigger flare-ups in me with my autoimmune issues. And so the flare-ups could put me on like a miserable month or 3 months of just terrible gut health, complete fatigue, constant headaches. but then when I was in a flare-up thinking, okay, I don't want dairy ever again. I don't want wine. I don't want my little, fair trade organic cane sugar chocolate bar anymore. But then when I'd be feeling really well, it's like if I can't have it, I would mourn it. So I have definitely been experimenting over the last 4 years since I cut down, got more specific with foods and finding which foods were causing flare-ups. Whereas 9 years ago, what we did was just switch to organic. So everything I was eating was organic and taking out processed foods. That was hard at first because I used to go to the grocery store 9 years ago and spend $20 for a whole week of food on just myself because I was buying hot dogs and Kool-Aid. And now if I go to the store, and just buy everything organic or from a organic farmer locally, then I'm spending on just myself $40. So it's like double, like everything's double. That was the hardest part for me, I think, was like, okay, finances and switching to organic. And then 4 years ago, okay, now even organic dairy and organic grains and organic wines are causing me to flare up. And I think what I learned that I would love to touch on for a moment, in the last 4 years, no matter which foods I was cutting out and completely going off of cold turkey, I was still experiencing flare-ups that would affect me, even if I hadn't been on foods. So there's not enough I can say about my personal discovery. I mean, I had heard it for years. My husband had told me over and over again, stress is causing your immune system to not function correctly. And you hear it and you're like, yes. And you might talk to your clients about it and write about it in a blog post. But the job and the hours that I was keeping in the last 4 years were excessive. And it was 45 to 50 hours a week. And then also working part-time on my passion, which is fertility coaching. So the stress that I was putting myself under and the pressure to be in a very fast-moving office as my day job, and then I kind of just didn't get it. I was like, yes, stress affects the immune system. It affects your gut health. But until I left that position this summer in July, has it been like night and day? And so finally, I personally have a testimony on my own body to see when I took off that pressure cooker career I had and took that out of the picture, I'm able, like the other day, I had a flatbread breakfast sandwich that wasn't gluten-free, and I don't know if everything in it was organic. And I ate it and had no issues, not even 3 days later, with having eaten gluten, even though I'm gluten sensitive. And I'm like, why is this happening? The other day I was able to have a glass of wine. I'm not doing it every day. I'm not doing it every week, maybe once a month, maybe once every 2 months. But it's like, wow, I could not do this in the last 4 years and get away with it. And so it's because my body is not using all of its resources to try to balance the chronic stress and the high cortisol levels that were just staying high pretty much every day, Monday through Friday, maybe going down a little bit on the weekends, but shooting right back up before you know it. Even when I would come home from work and we talk about the importance of relaxing and de-stressing, I wasn't getting that effect, even though I was trying to unplug. And so just having that completely out of the entire picture, I'm noticing, wow, my immune system can support having 1 glass of wine a month if I want it, or a bite of chocolate every, 5 days or so if I want it, and I don't experience a flare up and I don't have gut issues. So it's kind of exciting to see the way that stress literally can keep someone from reaching their full potential and thriving.
And how much flexibility you have now because you don't have the stress of your job, but you can handle like the stressor of a little bit more chocolate or wine if you want it, right?
Exactly.
So nice. Yeah, I would way rather the stress of the wine and the chocolate versus the stress of work.
Exactly. That's a great way to put it.
Yeah. Did you tell anyone as you were going through this for the last 9 years? Because your family knew, obviously.
You know, I didn't. I kept it within my husband and I. And, you know, I talked to my mom a lot about it, and the last couple of years started talking to my sister about it, because she ended up on a path where they said, okay, it's time for you to do what your mom did, and you need monthly transfusions. And I said, no, stop. You can change it. But publicly, it, you know, my friends knew, wow, her diet is weird.
Yeah.
And they didn't understand it. And they were always supportive, always. But I always felt pressure on myself that I was an inconvenience around my friends. And so I just, you know, it's hard to really tell the story until you feel like you're coming through the other end of it.
Yeah.
I think.
100%. Yeah. I didn't start sharing stuff until I had 3 surgeries for ovarian cysts, and then it wasn't until after my last one and I started to see a natural health practitioner. And I started feeling like I had some control over my life, that I could talk about it, because it wasn't, it was too much before that to do it. So,
yeah. And I know your story is incredible. I can't imagine still feeling like you don't know, and maybe you and your doctor still don't know yet.
Yeah.
How, you know, because we start with natural health practitioners, we'll start a protocol, and I'll be like, okay, we're going to peel back the first layer. You know, we're on the journey, but you still don't know yet if that first protocol is going to change anything. And then you'll start another one, like, okay, now we can work on this layer. So it's still a bit of a process, with much more light at the end of the tunnel, I think, than not having the input of a natural health practitioner. But
it helps so much to have someone to talk to about that stuff, and it evolves. I mean, at the beginning it was more focused on gut health and my ovarian cysts and like the very surface level symptoms, right? But now it's to the point of like getting my cycle normal and all of that stuff that you've gone through and figuring all that out. So it evolves over time, but now that I'm more comfortable with it, I'm more comfortable sharing it. And now that, and I'm sure it's the same hopefully with you, is that now that you're comfortable sharing, you don't feel so constrained and limited, and you feel a little bit more empowered about what you're going through.
Yes, I do. And that's why it was so exciting for me to find you on your Instagram and what you're doing to open up a platform for other women who are dealing with chronic issues or have dealt with and are overcoming them, have overcome, to share their story and be like, we need more conversation about this in America. We don't talk about chronic illnesses enough, or the struggle, and the isolation. Yeah. And so, or that there's hope at the end of the tunnel. Like, if there's more discussion about it, maybe there'd be more referrals. Like, well, maybe you should talk to this natural person that I used and they helped me. Or maybe we can, go shopping together and learn how to read labels at the grocery store together, instead of feeling the weight of all of that on your own shoulders by yourself. Can be really frustrating.
Oh yeah. And not knowing what to do is crazy. Yeah.
Yeah, totally. Feeling stuck. And I think that's also inspirational, to know that other people have had success with looking at their health project. I like to say project instead of issue. Yeah. Their health project, from a holistic perspective, that there can be success in looking at it that way, that it doesn't always have to be wrapped up in a box coming from a conventional doctor who says this is the only way to do it. By the way, P.S., it's going to require being on pharmaceuticals the rest of your life. Yeah. And I was, when I was first seeing the impacts of Hashimoto's, I was working a very, 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 very part-time job. I think I was babysitting on a Friday for like a newborn, just on a Friday. And then I was doing some paperwork for a nonprofit, maybe like 10 hours a week. And then studying for fertility coaching during the days. And when I learned that, I was like, wow, my body, I think one of the biggest wake up calls was my body had dropped 10 pounds, and I'm a small person anyway. I have really small bones, so I don't have any weight to lose.
Yeah.
My pants didn't fit me anymore. And then I would be driving home from work, and I was in a really small Texas town where like my house was 5 minutes from the nonprofit. And I would like get so sleepy that I would have to pull over and take a nap.
Wow.
Driving. And my memory, that was one of the other big symptoms of Hashimoto's, was my memory was shot. Like people would say, remember we were talking about this like maybe like 6 months ago. And I was like, I have no idea.
Yeah.
So those were kind of my big 3 symptom wake up calls, where it was like, you have to do something now or you're going to be miserable. So it felt really counterintuitive that I would have to quit my 10 hours a week job. Right. Like to survive and just focus on me. But you know what? Wise people in my life at the time, they said, Justina, your full-time job right now is getting better.
Yeah.
And if you're going to do this the natural way, where you aren't stuck on a thyroid prescription for the rest of your life that causes all these side effects and worse things than what you're experiencing now, then you have to treat this like a full-time job. Yeah. You have to start cooking for yourself these amazing foods and avoiding gluten, you know, going the hard route to research what is gluten. And I also did autoimmune paleo diet a couple of different times to sort of reset my entire immune system when things had gotten really bad through flare-ups again. And, you know, sometimes we have to do things that don't make sense to society, that may not make sense to our conventional doctors. So it's always amazing to find people in your life that understand holistic health and know that like to really get to a point where you can thrive throughout your whole life and not rely on these pharmaceuticals, you take time now and you devote time now to getting better, and you quit 10-hour week jobs because they are impacting you. You know, finding support groups who are going to say, yes, we'll be your tribe, we'll be your community to get through this.
Yeah. Yeah, because a lot of women sometimes don't know I didn't know how bad I felt before I started feeling good, right? And it's
totally
that whole process, how life-changing it can be. And I say life-changing, and it's, who says life-changing? But I mean, when you start to feel good, it's amazing what you feel like you can do, right? It's like you can change the world. So, and that's kind of, I wish all women felt like this, because could you imagine if every woman felt unstoppable?
We would be like, we'd be running the world.
I know, such a force to be reckoned with. So
exactly.
Yeah. What are you most grateful about now?
I'm most thankful that I stopped limiting myself with my thoughts. So that's kind of a new shift for me in the last really 3 months, is with support of, you know, inspiration that I've been seeing through you and a lot of other like-minded professionals on Instagram and in my personal life, my husband, just saying like, you don't have to work a 40-hour high pressure career, you know, benefiting job to pay the bills.
Yeah.
You don't have to sacrifice your health, even though I was, you know, in the last 3 years healthier than I had ever been. There was still that piece of chronic stress. And kind of, I like what you said, you don't know how bad you feel until you feel better. I didn't know how stressed I was until I took a stress test. I'm a very like calm person. And I had to take a stress test to actually prove to myself that I was very through the roof stressed out. And I didn't feel that. And I think that's because my body grew up only knowing high stress. And so that was my normal. I never knew low stress.
Yeah.
And that's why I would continue putting myself in work situations where all the pressure was on me. And I was the one that, you know, opened the building at the beginning of the day and made sure that everything ran and everyone relied. I would put myself in positions where I was relied upon for things to go well. And I think that's because it's all I ever knew. Maybe I saw my parents work that way. I don't know. But so what I'm grateful for today is I don't have to live that way to enjoy life. And so also taking off the limits on my thoughts of what I can do to make money.
Yeah.
So I don't know if you experienced this at all, but in the last 3 years that I've been teaching fertility charting and trying to focus more on my passion, and 5 years since I've started studying this, I told myself this little lie and this little story I made up, no one else told me, that my ability to make money and provide for myself by following my passion and getting to do my passion for a living was not possible. And I don't know why I told myself that story, but I really love that some of the right life coaches came into my world at the right time to help me lift that story out of my mind, but more importantly, like out of my nervous system and out of my womb, kind of areas in my body on an energetic level where I had let that settle.
Yeah.
And so not only is it lifted from my brain, but we like worked on an energetic level to lift it from my body. And I think that was part of the heavy part of, I would do really well working on my business. And then I would go back to this story, like, no, you don't get to do this for a living. If you want to pay your bills, you know, you have to work hard and be miserable and suffer. Like, that's what Americans do.
It's true. And so many women do. And then sacrifice their own sanity, their own happiness in the process too.
Yeah. And I think that, I don't know, do you think we learn it behaviorally? Like we see it and so we do that, or?
Women, I don't know. I feel like women are so tough.
True.
Do anything to make things work in a way. So a lot of women put themselves second and put their family or their husband or their partner or anyone ahead of themselves. And don't always focus on what they need in order to be happy, whether that's like their own health or whether that's just their own passions and having hobbies and crafts, or whether that's sexually often as well, or anything like that. Is that we're so subservient sometimes, which is so sad, because when women find the burning passion inside of them that makes them come alive, it makes the world just a better place.
It really does.
So,
and I like that you said, like, we do it because we're tough.
Yeah.
And we can literally do that. But it doesn't mean we have to. We can reach a much more euphoric way of living if we kind of take the limits off. Yeah.
It kind of feeds perfectly into my next two questions.
Cool.
Yeah. I always ask people I interview, or the Earth Girls I interview for their stories, what's your definition of perfectly imperfect?
Ooh. A big fat picture of me in the dictionary.
Yeah. Excellent.
Perfectly imperfect. So the word perfect has actually been on my radar since July. So again, the synchronicity of us connecting. I didn't know I was trying to be a perfectionist or was a perfectionist until I realized, maybe I read an article on Elephant Journal or something. Maybe enough things popped up that I finally got it. Yeah. But I found that I'm not finishing projects because I'll start like 1,000 projects and I won't finish any of them. And that's, can be a symptom of perfectionism. And I had to start asking myself why I needed things to be perfect. And I think it's because I thought I would fail. So what I've been really exploring now is, you know what? I want to fail because it means I'm actually finishing something.
Yeah.
And so my definition of perfectly imperfect might be willing to do things wrong 5 times or 6 times so that you do it right the 7th time. Like fall down 6 times, get up 7.
I love that. Yeah. Because so many women often, for fear of perfection, don't risk anything, right? And that's for a long time I never talked about anything because wanted to be perfect. And if I was vulnerable and open, then I wasn't, right? And so
Totally.
hide things or don't let themselves get their hopes up, because if they aren't perfect or they fail doing something, then they're not enough and they're not worthy. So yeah, I love what you said. Mm-hmm. What's your definition of powerfully passionate? Because I know you always say your passion project, which I love.
Yes, powerfully passionate. I think when we are trying to figure out what we're passionate about, I've been in that phase of life several times. Goodness, I got a 4-year degree in something I'm not ever going to use. So I don't think when we come out of, a lot of us, depending on how our parents guided us, don't come out of high school knowing what we're passionate about. It takes some time to figure that out. Even in college, you are still figuring that out constantly. So I think one thing we can do to kind of figure out if we're passionate about something is this my passion? Asking the question, does it make me feel powerful in a good way? And I think women that I talk to, and myself included, sometimes stray away from the word powerful because it sounds like very patriarchal and maybe reminds us of like cement blocks. We don't want to be this hard, tough, powerful, but maybe we want to be empowering and empowered.
Yeah.
And so if we're thinking about things, whether it's crafts or articles that we want to write or things we want to make, jewelry, or all of these different creativity juices that we can flow into, does it empower us to do it? Like, does it make us feel more confident? Does it make us feel closer to knowing who we are? And I think when those things add up, then we're like definitely powerfully passionate.
Yes, I love that. I think I have 2 more questions for you. One of which is very important is, what's the best way for women to connect with you online, or what's the space that you hang out on?
Yes. So one of my favorite spaces to hang out on online is Instagram, because there's so many people that inspire me, whether they're just stay-at-home, not just stay-at-home moms, but whether they're stay-at-home moms or yoga teachers or nutritional fitness coaches like you. Like, it's an inspiring place to be. So if you aren't on Instagram and you feel like you want some guidance, that's the place to go to meet people who will inspire you on a daily basis to reach your passions. So on Instagram, my handle is Love My Fertility. And then we are also on Facebook. And on Facebook, we use that medium to share education about female health and wellness.
Cool.
You can also find me on my website at Justina, Justina Thompson.com. And on there, you'll learn more about the different services that you can look at that I offer.
And if for your girls, it's going to be below the YouTube video. All the links will be there, and then on the blog post as well. So you can always follow Justina that way, which is a great way to reach out to her.
Awesome.
I want to first, before I ask my final question, to take a second to thank you for being who you are. And I know you've gone through a crazy journey of everything you've been through in terms of your Hashimoto's, your autoimmune, your genetics, and everything you've gone through is more than a lot of people can handle in their lifetime. But the way you've taken it and turned it into something that you are empowered about, and turned it into something that without it you wouldn't be who you are, and you're sharing with the world something that can help so many more women, is amazing. So I just want to thank you for sharing your story and being open with a lot more women, so that they know that they're not alone going through these things, and there's other options out there for them. So thank you.
Thank you. That was so heartfelt. It brings me so much joy today.
Yeah, well, we often don't hear it, right? And women don't get thanks a lot. So I want to take a second, and you deserve a lot more than that. But that's
right.
Yeah.
That reminds me of a quote I just read today, and I will butcher it, but it's like, when you see something beautiful in someone, just tell them.
It's something that we should. Like, sometimes I worry, what if I compliment someone on their shirt I really like, and I'm not dressed very well? Then maybe they think less of the compliment because of how I like a weird kind of comparison. If we just say good things about other people, it'll come around so much more.
Totally. Yeah, exactly.
Totally. So the last question I usually finish off with is, if you had not necessarily one piece of advice, but if there's anything you want for Earth Girls to take away from your story, if they're struggling or struggled through something or are trying to figure out what makes them come alive, is there anything, what would you say to them?
I would say know the word epigenetics, and that's like a little sciencey versus inspirational.
Mm-hmm.
But the science of epigenetics is whatever health issue you're dealing with, whether your parents and grandparents had it, whether it runs in your family or not, through science, we do have the ability to turn on genes that will benefit us and turn off genes that will not. And that is powerful news and information, and can be done through natural mediums like just lifestyle and diet and exercise. Mm-hmm. So you're never really stuck. If you come from a long line of infertility issues or cancers, you're never stuck. Never believe that you are what others have had before you, because science shows that you actually literally can turn off genes and turn on good ones. So
yes, I love that.
Yeah.
Finish with that, because that is cool. Thank you so much, Justina.
Thank you. It was lovely seeing you. We'll be in touch.
Yeah. Thanks so much for checking out this video. If you liked it, be sure to actually like below and subscribe for more. And let us know what you thought on Instagram. These stories are here to empower you to unearth yourself so you live powerfully passionate. So you embrace your imperfections and find purpose in your story. You are not alone. And together we can turn our struggles into our strengths. Until next time, 2 weeks. The world needs women who have come alive. Unearth yourself. The sky is the limit, Earth Girls.